Parents made me pay rent at 16 while sister got free ride. Now she's broke and I'm a landlord. My mom said it like it was the most reasonable sentence in the world, like she was asking me to pass the salt. Just let her stay in one of your places for a little while, she pleaded across my dining table, palms up, eyes shiny. My sister was on my couch with her mascara smeared into 2 gray tracks, clutching a crumpled notice like it was a death certificate. My dad stood behind her, arms folded, so tight his knuckles were pale, doing that thing where he looks at the floor because it's easier than looking at me. And I could feel my heartbeat in my ears, loud and dumb, because the first thought in my head wasn't even compassion. It was, here we go. The family has decided I'm the solution again. I kept my voice calm because if I didn't, I was going to say something unforgivable. One of my places, I repeated, slow, like I was tasting the words. My hands were flat on the table, fingers spread, try to keep myself anchored. You mean the duplex where people currently live? Or the small unit that's under lease until June? Or the granny flat I renovated with my own money while I worked 60-hour weeks? My sister hiccuped and wiped her face like she was offended by the list, like I'd just started reciting my own resume at her funeral. Mom flinched. Dad exhaled through his nose. And my sister, still crying, looked up at me with red eyes and said, "So you're really going to do this? You're really going to be like that?" It was Saturday night, and my house still smelled like garlic and roasted tomatoes because I'd made dinner for everyone like an idiot. I'd imagined a normal family evening. Pasta, wine, laughing at dumb stories. Maybe even one of those rare moments where I didn't feel like the designated grown-up. Instead, I was standing at my sink rinsing plates when I heard my sister's voice crack in the living room. "They're kicking me out," she sobbed, and my mother went, "Oh, my baby," in the tone she used when my sister scraped her knee in kindergarten. I walked back in, dish towel in my hands, and saw the eviction notice on my coffee table. My stomach dropped before I even read the date. Then my mom turned to me like she'd been waiting for the right moment to deploy me. "You have property," she said, eyes bright with hope. "This is what family is for." I need to explain why that sentence made me want to laugh and scream at the same time, because on paper it sounds simple. Sister is in trouble. I have resources. Help her. I get it. If you met us at a barbecue, you'd probably think I'm the successful one and she's the messy one, and this is just the universe balancing things out. But the reason my jaw went tight when my mom said family is because family has always been the word they used when they wanted something from me that they didn't want to ask from her. When I was 16, my parents made me pay rent. Not help out with groceries sometimes. Not pick up a bill once I got a part-time job. Actual rent. A set amount due every Friday like I was a tenant. I was still in high school. I worked evenings and weekends at a supermarket, then later at a cafe when I turned 17 because it paid better, but I came home smelling like milk and espresso and regret. Every payday, I transferred money to my dad's account with the reference rent because he told me that's what adults do, and if I wanted to be treated like an adult, I had to act like one. Meanwhile, my older sister, 2 years older, the golden child by birthright, paid nothing. She had her car insurance covered. She got help with textbooks. She got her phone bill paid until she was 23. If I forgot to send my rent by Friday night, my dad would stand in my doorway on Saturday morning and ask me if I was planning on freeloading. At the time, I didn't even have the vocabulary to call it what it was. I just knew it felt like being singled out. Like there were 2 sets of rules in our house. One for my sister's comfort and one for my character building. The official reason was always responsibility. Dad loved that word. He said he was preparing me for the real world, that he was teaching me the value of money. He also said, more than once, "You're different from her. You can handle it," which sounds like a compliment until you realize it's basically, "I'm going to burden you because you won't fall apart loudly enough to make me stop." And look, I'm not going to pretend my parents were rolling in cash. We were not rich. We were a household that always seemed one unexpected expense away from chaos. Dad's work was inconsistent. Mom did shift work. There were months where the electricity bill sat on the bench like a threat. But even then, it was never framed as "we need help." It was framed as "you need discipline." And somehow, My sister's discipline never required her to hand over money. I remember the first time Dad told me I had to pay. It was after school. I just got my first pay from the supermarket. Something small like $200, and I'd been stupidly excited. I thought it meant freedom. New sneakers without begging, a bit of savings, maybe even a license sooner. Dad sat me down at the kitchen table and said, "Now that you're earning, you'll be contributing." He named an amount that made my chest go tight. I tried to argue, quietly, because arguing wasn't safe in our house, and he said, "If you want to live here, you pay." Mom stood behind him, arms crossed, not meeting my eyes. I asked, "Does Lena have to pay?" And Dad's face hardened. "Don't worry about what your sister does." That became their go-to line. Don't worry about your sister. Focus on yourself. Stop comparing. Be mature. Be grateful. It was amazing how often maturity meant accept unfairness without making noise. My sister's version of teenage hardship was that my parents didn't understand her. She'd stomp around the house, slam doors, and my mom would trail after her like a nurse. When Lena decided she couldn't cope with her casual job, my parents said, "It's okay, darling, focus on school." When I said I couldn't pick up an extra shift because I had a math exam, Dad said, "That's not my problem. Rent's still due." I learned to study on my break. I learned to do homework with aching feet. I learned to keep receipts. I learned to watch adults bend rules for the person who cried the loudest. The thing is, paying rent at 16 did teach me things. Just not the things my parents thought they were teaching. It taught me that if I wanted stability, I had to make it myself. It taught me not to count on anyone's fairness. It taught me to keep my money separate. It taught me that love in my family came with invoices. By the time I graduated, I was obsessed with escape. Not like dramatic runaway escape, but the quiet, methodical kind. Saving, budgeting, planning. I didn't go to uni straight away because I couldn't afford it without drowning in debt, and I didn't have the emotional space to be broke and academically stressed while still paying rent to my parents. I worked full-time. I rented a room with 2 strangers. I watched my friends go to parties, and I watched my bank account instead. I felt jealous sometimes, like a sourness in my throat, but it was mixed with this stubborn drive that kept me moving. If life was going to be hard, I wanted hard to lead somewhere. Meanwhile, Lena drifted. Not in an evil way. In the way some people drift when there's always a cushion underneath them. She bounced between courses, moved back home twice, had a rough time that required my mom to pay her bills, dated men who were either unemployed or mysteriously between opportunities. She would post motivational quotes online about protecting her peace, while my parents protected her peace with their wallets. The moment everything cracked for me wasn't even about money. It was a random Wednesday when I was 19. I came home late from work, exhausted, and saw Lena in the kitchen eating leftovers, laughing on the phone. Dad was at the bench doing his bank stuff. I asked him if I could delay rent by 1 day because my hours had been cut and I'd miscalculated. His face went cold. He said, "If you can't pay, you can't live here." And then, 2 minutes later, Lena hung up and said, "Dad, I need petrol money," and he handed her 50 without blinking. I stood there with my shoes still on, work apron still tied around my waist, and something inside me just clicked into place. Not rage, just clarity. I realized I wasn't going to out-earn the favoritism. I wasn't going to perform my way into being treated equally. The rules weren't about responsibility. They were about who they emotionally prioritized. That day, I started planning my exit like it was a second job. I moved out within 3 months. I stopped sending rent, transfers, and started sending myself money. I kept contact with my parents, but I stopped telling them things that mattered. Every time I had a win, I swallowed it before sharing, because wins attracted expectations. If I looked too stable, they treated me like a resource. Which is why, when people find out I'm a landlord now, they assume I've always been comfortable. They don't see the years of cheap groceries and skipped nights out, the secondhand furniture, the nights I fell asleep in my car during lunch breaks because I was working back-to-back shifts. They don't see me sitting on my bedroom floor at 24 with a spreadsheet open, calculating how long it would take to save a deposit if I didn't buy anything fun for another 18 months. They don't see the panic when my first property settlement went through and I stared at the numbers like I'd accidentally joined a cult. They don't see that my landlord title started with me buying a rundown duplex an hour out of the city, living in one half with a broken heater, and renting the other half to a single mom who watered my plants when I had night shifts. I got here by being boring on purpose. I also got here because the rent my parents took from me at 16 made me terrified of being powerless. I didn't want anyone to ever be able to look at me and say, "If you can't pay, you can't live." I wanted a door that was mine. Now I'm 30, and I have 3 properties. Not fancy ones. Not influencer innovation ones. Just solid, decent places that I've maintained well. I work in finance now. Ironic, considering my family thinks money is just something you ask for when you need it. I'm not rolling in cash, but I'm stable. I can breathe. And because I can breathe, my family has started treating my life like a storage unit for their emergencies. So back to Saturday night. My sister had been living with a boyfriend for a couple of years. The relationship, from what I could gather through the fog of family updates, was one long cycle of dramatic fights and reconciliation posts. They had a kid together. She didn't work consistently. He worked inconsistently, too. My parents would say things like, "They're figuring it out, and it's hard these days, and we don't want to judge." Which, sure, I wasn't judging. I was minding my business. But I also wasn't surprised when things eventually collapsed. She showed up at my house with my parents like it was a coordinated operation. I didn't even know they were coming until my mom texted, "On our way." Important. I thought someone was sick. I thought Dad had finally had a health scare. I opened the door and saw Lena's puffy face, and my stomach sank because I knew it was going to be about money. We ate dinner first because my mom insists on rituals even when we're about to tear each other apart. Lena barely touched her food. Her kid, my niece, sat at my table swinging her legs, munching bread and watching cartoons on a tablet. Every time I looked at her, I felt this ache behind my ribs because none of this was her fault. Adults love to light fires and then act shocked when the smoke reaches the kids. After dinner, Lena finally slid the eviction notice onto my coffee table. The paper looked cheap, like it had been printed in a hurry. My mom's hand flew to her mouth. My dad started asking practical questions, the way he does when he wants to feel in control. What happened? When is it effective? Did you talk to anyone? Lena cried harder. She said her boyfriend had stopped paying rent, that he'd lied about money, that the landlord didn't care that she had child. She said she tried. She said she had nowhere to go. Then my mom turned to me with that hopeful face. "You have a place," she said. "You have more than one." I just stared at her. In my head, I saw 16-year-old me standing at the kitchen table, asking if I could pay one day late. I heard my dad's voice. "If you can't pay, you can't live here." And then I looked at the woman in front of me asking me to give my sister a free home because family. I said carefully, "What are you asking me to do?" Mom's eyes widened like I was being cruel for needing clarity. "Let Lena and the baby stay," she said, "in one of your rentals. Temporarily." Temporarily. I repeated because that word has a funny way of becoming permanent in my family. "Okay, and the tenant who currently lives there?" Dad finally looked at me. "You have that unit near the station," he said. "Isn't someone moving out?" "Yes," I said. "In February. It's December." Mom waved her hand like dates or suggestions. "But you could." "No," I said. Not loud. Just firm. "I can't kick someone out." Lena sniffed. "It's not kicking them out. It's asking." "People don't ask to leave their homes for someone else's convenience," I said. I could hear the edge creeping into my voice. "They have leases. They have their own lives." My mom's face crumpled. "So what, you're saying no? You'd rather your sister be homeless?" That line is like a family heirloom. It's the one they bring out whenever they want to turn boundaries into cruelty. I took a breath, so slow it felt like swallowing glass. "I'm not saying I'd rather anything," I said. "I'm saying you're asking me to solve this in a way that hurts someone else." Dad rubbed his forehead. "You're being rigid," he muttered. Lena's eyes flashed. "Of course you'd say that," she snapped. "You've always been like this. Always thinking you're better." There it was. The trigger phrase. Better. Like fairness is arrogance. I didn't respond immediately. I watched my niece swing her legs under my chair, humming to herself, completely unaware that the adults were building a little stage for generational resentment. My hands were shaking, but I kept them still by gripping the edge of my seat. "I'm going to ask something," I said, voice low. "And I want you all to answer honestly." Mom blinked. Dad's jaw tightened. Lena wiped her face with the sleeve of her hoodie like a teenager. "When I was 16, I said, why did I have to pay rent?" Nobody spoke. Mom's eyes darted away. Dad stared at the wall. Lena looked confused for half a second, like she'd forgotten that chapter existed. Dad finally said, "We've been over this." "No," I said. "We haven't. You've dismissed it every time I brought it up." Mom sighed like I was being inconvenient. "We needed help," she said softly. I nodded. "Okay. And why didn't Lena pay?" Mom started. "Because..." Dad cut in. "She didn't have a job." I stared at him. "She didn't have a job because you told her she didn't need one. You let her focus on school." Lena scoffed. "I was stressed. I had anxiety. And I didn't." I asked, and my voice cracked slightly, which annoyed me. I didn't want emotion to be used as a weapon against me. "I worked until 10, did homework at midnight, and got told I was ungrateful if I complained." Mom's eyes filled. "You were always so capable," she whispered, like that explained everything. That sentence hit me like a slap because it was the truth and also the betrayal. Capable. So you get more weight. You get less softness. You get turned into a tool. So because I was capable, I said, very slowly, "You made me pay rent, but because Lena was..." "What? Fragile?" "You protected her." Lena sat up straighter, anger replacing tears. "Oh my God," she said. "You're still mad about that? That was like forever ago." "Forever ago." I repeated, and I could hear myself shaking now. "It wasn't forever ago when you were living at home at 23 without paying a cent. It wasn't forever ago when Mom paid your rego. It wasn't forever ago when Dad co-signed your credit card." Dad's face hardened. "Watch your mouth." I actually laughed, a short, ugly sound. "My mouth," I said. "You want to talk about watching mouths? You watched mine when I tried to talk about this for years, and you told me to get over it." Mom reached for my hand. "Sweetheart, we didn't realize..." "Yes, you did," I said, and my voice surprised me with how steady it got again. "You realized every Friday when you took money from your 16-year-old. You realized every time you asked me for it like it was rent to a landlord. And now you're here asking me to be a landlord to her, except you want me to do it for free." Silence fell like a heavy blanket. Lena's face went hot. "So this is revenge," she spat. "It's not revenge," I said. "It's reality. I can't and won't give you free housing because you're my sister. That's not how any of this works." Mom's voice got sharp. "So what is she supposed to do?" I swallowed. My chest ached. I did care. That was the frustrating part. If I hated my sister, this would be easy. But I didn't hate her. I hated the pattern. I hated the entitlement. I hated my parents turning my stability into an obligation. "What are you doing?" I asked Lena, softer, like practically. "Do you have income? Any savings? Can you stay with Mom and Dad for a bit?" Lena's eyes flicked to them and then away. Dad looked uncomfortable. Mom said quickly, "We don't have space." "Ister here. You have a spare room." "It's full of storage," Mom said, as if that was a natural reason a child couldn't sleep there. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. The hypocrisy was so clean it almost took my breath. They couldn't make space for her, but they wanted me to rearrange tenants and leases and legal obligations. "So," I said, "you won't clear a room, but you want me to clear a unit." Dad snapped. "That's not fair." I blinked at him. "Oh," I said quietly. "Now you care about fair." Lena started crying again, but sounded different now, more angry than broken. "You've got it so easy," she sobbed. "You've always been lucky. Things just work out for you." "Lucky." I looked at her and saw, for the first time, how she genuinely believed that. She'd watched me grind and interpreted it as luck because acknowledging my effort would mean acknowledging her lack of it. It would mean admitting she'd been cushioned. My voice softened because my niece was right there, and I didn't want this to become a screaming match in front of her. "It didn't work out for me," I said. "I worked it out. I worked while you slept. I paid rent while you got rides. I left home because I couldn't afford to stay. I saved because no one was coming to rescue me. That's not luck. Lena shook her head like I was lying. You're so cold, she whispered. I felt my throat tighten. Cold. That's what they call you when you stop burning yourself to keep them warm. Here's the part where I could have slammed the door on all of them and made a dramatic point. But life isn't a movie, and my niece needed adults who weren't petty. I also didn't want to be the villain in my own story, even if my family was determined to cast me that way. So I made an offer. A real one. Not a sure, move in and never leave offer, but a practical one. I can help you find a place, I said. I can help with the bond if you're short. I can help you write a budget. I can even rent to you if one of my places becomes available, and if you sign a lease and pay rent like anyone else. But I'm not giving you a free unit. And I'm not displacing someone who's been paying on time because you and your boyfriend didn't. Mom looked offended, like I'd offered her a coupon instead of a donation. Dad's jaw worked like he was chewing anger. Lena stared at me like I'd offered her insult. You'd make me pay you, she said, incredulous, like she'd caught me in a moral crime. Yes, I said simply, because that's what rent is. But you're my sister, she choked out. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't lecture. I just said the truth that had been sitting in my bones since I was 16. I was your sister when Dad took my money every Friday, I said. That didn't stop him. Dad flinched. My mom sucked in a breath. Lena went still. For a second, I thought maybe that would be the moment they finally understood the shape of what they'd done. But then my mom did what she always does when confronted with something she can't emotionally process. She turned it into my responsibility to fix the discomfort. Why are you bringing up the past? She whispered, tears spilling. This isn't about you. I felt my eyes sting, not because I was sad for her, but because I was tired. So tired of being told that my pain was inconvenient timing. It's always about me. When you need something, I said, and I hated how calm I sounded, like I'd rehearsed it for years. But it's never about me, when I was the one being hurt. Dad grabbed his keys like he needed movement to escape accountability. This is going nowhere, he muttered. Lena stood up, wiping her face aggressively. Fine, she said, voice shaking with rage. I'll figure it out. Like always. Don't worry. You can keep being perfect. She walked to the door, and my niece followed, confused, clutching her little stuffed toy. My mom hurried after them, calling Lena's name. Dad paused in my hallway and finally looked at me, really looked like he wanted to say something that might make him feel like less of a villain. You're successful, he said, like it was an accusation. You could be kinder. I stared at him. My throat tightened. I wanted to scream. I was a child. I wanted to list every Friday transfer, every missed party, every time I cried silently in my room, because crying loudly got you labeled dramatic. I wanted to remind him that kindness wasn't a currency he'd ever handed me without conditions. Instead, I said, quietly, I am kind. I'm just not letting you use me. He left without responding. After they drove off, my house was suddenly too quiet. I stood in my kitchen with the leftover pasta congealing in the pot, and my hands started shaking again now that there was no audience. I sat on my floor, back against the cupboard, and stared at my own feet like they might tell me if I'd done the right thing. That's the worst part of growing up as the scapegoat. Even when you set a healthy boundary, you feel like you've committed a crime. My phone buzzed 20 minutes later. A text from my mom. I can't believe you turned your back on your sister when she needs you. I stared at it until my vision blurred. Then another text. She's been through enough. She has a child. Have a heart. And then, because my family is nothing if not consistent, a text from Lena. Congrats. You finally got to be dad. Hope your tenants love you more than we do. That one hit hard because it was meant to make me flinch into submission. It was also proof that she didn't see me as a person. She saw me as a resource with feelings that got in the way. I didn't respond right away. I waited until my hands stopped shaking. The next morning, I went to my office and tried to focus on emails, but my brain kept replaying the scene. Lena's face, my mom's pleading, my dad's folded arms. I felt guilty in waves. Then I felt angry. Then I felt guilty again for feeling angry. I hated that my family could make me question my own spine. At lunch, I called my property manager to check something I already knew because I needed facts to calm myself. Any vacancies coming up soon? I asked. Nothing until end of February, she said. And even then, we've got a wait list. I hung up and sat there staring at my desk. No vacancy. No magic solution. My family was asking me to perform a miracle and calling me heartless when I said I couldn't. That night, my mom called. I answered because she'd keep calling and because part of me still hoped for a version of her that could hear me. She didn't start with hello. She started with, "Your sister is sleeping on our couch." I blinked. "You said you didn't have space." "We're making do," she snapped, and I could hear the resentment like static. She's exhausted. The baby is confused. And she's humiliated. Humiliated. Again. Always the word when Lena experiences consequences. Never the word for me when I was 16 and handing over money like a mini adult. I took a breath. "Okay," I said. "I'm glad she has somewhere safe tonight." Mom's tone sharpened. "Is that all you have to say?" I felt my stomach knot. "What do you want me to say?" "I want you to help," she said, voice breaking, like I was making her beg. "I offered help," I said. "I offered the bond. I offered practical support. You didn't want that. You wanted me to give her a free unit." Mom went quiet for a moment, and then she said, softer, "She's your sister." I closed my eyes. "Mom," I said, "I was your daughter when you let Dad charge me rent at 16. There was a pause so long I could hear her breathing. When she finally spoke, her voice was small. "We thought it would make you strong," she whispered. It was the closest thing to an admission I'd ever heard from her. "It did," I said, and my voice cracked a little. But it also made me feel like I didn't deserve softness, like I was only valued for what I could provide. She started to cry, and for a second, I almost slid back into the old role. Comfort her, minimize myself, keep the peace. But I didn't. "I'm not punishing Lena," I said quietly. "I'm refusing to keep paying for the way you raised us differently." Mom sniffed. "So you're really not going to let her move into one of your places?" "No," I said. "Not for free. Not without a lease. Not by hurting someone else." She whispered, "Your father says you become selfish." I felt my chest tighten, but I forced myself to speak evenly. "Dad thinks boundaries are selfish because he benefited from me not having any." Mom went silent again. Then she said, barely audible, "What do you want us to do?" And that question, finally, felt honest. Not a guilt trap, not a demand, a question. "I want you to stop treating my stability like it belongs to the family," I said. "I want you to stop making me the solution whenever Lena's life falls apart. And I want you to acknowledge that you didn't treat us equally." Mom didn't answer right away. When she did, she sounded tired. "Okay," she said. Not a full apology, not a dramatic transformation, but a crack in the wall. Over the next week, things got messy in a quieter way. Lena stayed at my parents' place. My mom complained about the mess and the noise, but still defended Lena like she was under attack. My dad stayed mostly silent, which is his specialty. Lena applied for rentals and got rejected because her references were patchy and her savings were basically non-existent. I offered to cover her bond again, in writing, because I'm the kind of person who needs evidence even in family situations. She didn't respond. Then, one afternoon, I got a text from Lena that just said, "Can we talk?" I stared at it for a long time, thumb hovering, my body bracing for manipulation. I typed back, "Yes." "Call me." She called that night. Her voice sounded raw. "I hate you," she said immediately, like she needed to clear the air with poison before she could breathe. I didn't respond to that. I waited. She sniffed. "I mean, I don't hate you. I'm just furious." "I know," I said. She swallowed hard. "Mom said you offered to pay the bond." "Yes," I said. There was silence. Then she said, in a smaller voice, "Why didn't you just let me move into your place?" I could have said 100 things. I could have thrown my teenage years at her like a brick. I could have made her cry and felt justified. But I remember my niece and the way she'd followed her mother to the door with her little toy, trusting the adults to be safe. So I said the simplest truth. "Because I can't afford to mix family and property," I said. "It ruins relationships. It ruins business. And I'm not risking either." Lena let out a shaky breath. "You think I wouldn't pay you?" "I think you've never had to," I said gently. "And I think you'd resent me the entire time if you did." She went quiet. Then, to my surprise, she said, "Probably." That tiny honesty felt like stepping onto a bridge I didn't know existed. I'm not trying to watch you suffer, I said. I'm trying to help you in a way that doesn't destroy me. She sniffed again. Mom says you're still mad about the rent thing. I didn't deny it. I'm not mad about money, I said. I'm mad about what it meant. Lena's voice got defensive. I didn't ask for that. I know, I said, but you benefited from it. Silence, then a quiet, almost resentful, yeah. That was the closest she'd ever come to acknowledging reality. We talked for another 20 minutes. Not warmly, not perfectly, but honestly. I offered again, bond money, help with applications, help drafting a simple budget. Lena didn't thank me, exactly, but she stopped attacking me long enough to accept. She gave me the details of a place she'd applied for. I transferred the bond money directly to the agency once she was approved, not to her, because I've learned how to help without handing people the steering wheel to my bank account. A month later, she moved into a small 2-bedroom unit across town. Not one of mine, a stranger's, which, honestly, was for the best. My parents acted like they had orchestrated the whole thing. My mom told relatives, we all pulled together, which made my twitch, but I didn't correct her because I was tired and because my niece needed stability more than I needed credit. Lena is still broke, in the sense that she's rebuilding from zero. She's working now, part-time, and it's hard. She complains a lot. She also doesn't have my parents' cushion in the same way anymore, because they're older and more stretched and, frankly, a little embarrassed that their enabling finally produced consequences they can't hide. And me? I'm still a landlord. I still own my boring, solid properties. I still get anxious about maintenance calls. I still feel my stomach drop when family members ask, so how many houses do you have now? Because I can hear the unspoken follow-up. What can you do for us? But I also feel something new underneath all of it, a steady refusal to be the family's emergency fund, just because I was trained to be strong. Sometimes I think about 16-year-old me transferring rent money with rent in the reference line. And I want to reach back through time and tell her that one day she'll own doors that no one can threaten to close on her. I want to tell her that being capable doesn't mean being available. I want to tell her that family isn't supposed to mean you get used until you're empty. My parents still don't fully get it. They still slip into old patterns. Lena still gets defensive when I talk about fairness. But that night at my dining table changed something, even if it didn't look like a movie moment. It forced a truth into the open. I wasn't born lucky. I was built careful, and I'm allowed to protect what I built, even from the people who think they're entitled to it.